Okay, we are live with Cosmin Dzsurdzsa, who has been very patient as I get all of the stuff together that we're going to talk about, which mostly Cosmin is going to be focused on Canada's crackdown on all kinds of things, but it's also how it's connected to global policy, I guess, or global alliances, and then what's happening with the Dutch farmers and all that good stuff. But let's start here first. Tee this up for us. What are we about to watch? Oh, and I should say, Cosmin is a senior researcher for True North. And do you want to real fast say where people can find you or what True North is before we get into this?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me, Allison. I'm happy to be on your show. True North is a Canadian digital media platform. We're at tnc.news. You can find me at Cosmin DZS. As for this clip, it's another example of the negative international attention Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has received for his extremely harsh COVID-19 pandemic policies. But beyond that, this particular commentator discusses the connection between Trudeau and Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who, as you may know, is currently facing a nationwide movement by farmers disputing his overreaching environmental policies. And many people have said that a lot of this movement is a reflection of the Freedom Convoy, which happened here in Canada in February. It is inspired by that, and it involves many of the same tactics. But in this video, Rowan Dean discusses how the connection between Trudeau and Rutte, particularly with relation to the World Economic Forum, because both of these leaders have been touted by Klaus Schwab as this new vision of the future of liberal world dominance.
Which seems like if I were to just choose out of a hat two countries that would be like leading this global alliance or in some way connected to influencing what we're about to talk about today, I would not have chosen the Netherlands or Canada. I don't know. Canada I just thought it was a bunch, years ago, you just thought of Canadians as just like people who at worst got frostbite, and just was not going to be what we're seeing now. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think this all evolved to what it is. I mean, we're going to talk later about the speech crackdown and going after disinformation or misinformation online, and your article that you wrote about YouTubers potentially leaving Canada over that. I don't know. Canada's just not the place I would have picked for that, but maybe you saw the warning signs before somebody like me. Okay, so this is Sky News. Now, I also want to say, when I was in mainstream TV news, I didn't know anything about the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab. This was not on my radar at all. And I am curious, after we watch this, what you think about the fact that this is kind of becoming part of mainstream talking points. Whereas, I mean, even just a few years ago, I'm not quite sure we would have had this discussion. But let's hear what he has to say.
Else it seems to be sliding into dictatorship is Holland, which may not entirely be a coincidence. The similarities between Canada and Holland are as startling as they are disturbing. Here's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, leader of the laughably and ironically named People's Party for Freedom and Democracy. Apart from obviously sharing the same wacky lefty sense of humour, those two both are, of course, golden pin-up boys for Klaus Schwab and the globalist fantasists of the World Economic Forum. Only a few months ago, it was the Canadian government that attacked its own citizens in the most grotesque and terrifyingly authoritarian manner during the so-called Truckers' Convoy revolts, when the government actually froze the bank accounts and basically starved out any individuals involved in what was legitimate, peaceful, democratic opposition to COVID mandates. That ended badly for Trudeau, particularly after this shameful incident in which Canadian mounted police trampled over a peaceful woman protester.
Come on through. What is happening here? Wow, what is this lady doing? Trampling.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop it there. When we're talking about how this this particular TV anchor, and he's connecting the trucker convoy protests and what's happening with the Dutch farmers. Help us connect those two from a policy standpoint, not just hey, these guys all love the World Economic Forum and they're trying to, how are the policies connected that in some way you can see, people who were protesting COVID mandates and farmers who are protesting nitrogen crackdowns. How are those two related?
Sure. So obviously the central issue at hand here, in both cases, there's a common theme, and that's government overreach into people's lives. And I think that's at the root. While the environmental policies enacted in Netherlands are separate from the pandemic restrictions we had here in Canada, as I explained before we started this live stream, most people don't know that the first convoy inspired event in Canada actually took place, I think it was in 2019, and it was a reaction to carbon taxes. And a bunch of truckers from the oil and gas industry rolled into Ottawa, similar situation, but in this case, our government didn't crack down on them. They didn't adopt emergency powers. They chose to escalate that when people rebelled against the COVID-19 measures. But we see like common methods, right? People rolling in with tractors, heavy equipment, blockading certain things. Of course, that's illegal, but this is some of the tactics that these protest movements employ. And we see a similar government response. Mark Rutte hasn't gone to speak with the protesters in any sort of public fashion, similar to Justin Trudeau. They have actually cracked down, and we see videos coming out of Netherlands with police using very aggressive riot, militarized tactics against the protesters. But as I said, I think the root of this is government overreach, people being tired of the government spreading its fingers into every aspect of their lives, whether it's farmers who are now threatened with the loss of their livelihood, or it was the huge number of people who were threatened with losing their livelihood because they didn't take the COVID-19 vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is an article that you wrote back in April before the Dutch farmer protests were even a thing. Trudeau government targets grain growers as worst emissions offenders. So not cattle, which is what we're seeing a lot of discussion about for the farmers over in Holland, but this here we're saying grain. Okay, so do you think this comes to Canada next? I mean, because I saw video that I haven't been able to verify myself, but I'm seeing that I think Poland has some protests happening right now with their farmers. So I saw last year or a couple years ago, India's farmers were, farmers protesting their government doesn't necessarily seem like a new thing. It feels like these crackdowns on agricultural production have been happening for a while. I think one of the things I hear from the farmers is why are we the focus of it versus airline industries or just other industries that you could say may have a bigger impact on the issues that they're claiming they're trying to police. So why do you think the farmers are the focus of it? And do you think this comes to Canada soon?
Whether it comes to Canada soon, on that question, I think it's already here, and it's already here in full force. I mentioned the carbon tax, so every Canadian in Canada has to pay a carbon tax. And before, it was actually based on the provinces, but the Liberal government instituted a federal carbon tax that extended to those provinces that were not willing to produce their own. And Canada has a major oil producing province, Alberta. They're subject to it. It's all over the country. Similarly, the government has put all these levies on different industries, especially the oil and gas. They want, I think Trudeau announced at the COP24 or the latest UN environmental meeting that he wants to cap emissions at like 40% in the oil and gas sector. We also saw the government sneakily reveal that they want to tax truck ownership. Like if you just own a pickup truck and it's not, you can't prove it's not for work, the Canadian government wants to fine you and tax you for that. And now we're seeing it with the farmers. There's a push right now by the Liberal government to tax emissions on fertilizer use. And people need to know there is no established scientific method in calculating how much emissions fertilizer produces from agricultural projects. So it's based on guesstimations, phony science. It is totally political. And so they want to pressure farmers to reduce the amount of emissions that their fertilizers produce. But in reality, Canada has some of the highest standards for fertilizer use. They're already maximizing, optimizing the full strength of the fertilizer they have to produce our yield and crops. So it's definitely going to impact that. And in that document by Agricultural Canada that I wrote about in that article, it singles them out. They say that Canadian farmers are among the worst emissions offenders among developed nations, which is just a ridiculous claim. I've spoken to farmers groups, they dispute it heavily, and it's just junk science. But the fact remains they're trying to institute policy that I sincerely believe, it is my opinion that it's totally ideologically driven, and it's flying in the face of the crushing reality the world is facing in terms of the food supply chain crisis, skyrocketing fertilizer prices, and more. It doesn't take anything like that into account. And I think it's a disastrous direction this country is taking. As you can see in Netherlands, there will be backlash.
So this comment thing is the farmers have a narrow view of things while the government sees the bigger picture, disagreeing with what we're discussing here. And I think somebody who would probably agree with that is Klaus Schwab. So here's a quote from him just a couple months ago, opening up the World Economic Forum. Let's just hear what he has to say. And let me know if you can't hear him, okay, Cosmin?
History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected. In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever.
And I mean, basically, that's just a quick quote, but it just lays out like we're going to have some serious problems. They don't say that they're going to create them in the sense that, you know, you may not believe that like there are certain things we've witnessed over the last couple of years were actually created, but the policies responding to them have been created. And the food shortages and other stuff that I've seen has been in large part a response to government policy. So it's like, so that just means we just have to do more. We just have to do more government. Like we just have to get together more, and you guys just don't see the full picture, and we see the full picture. And it does sound a lot like how Trudeau pitches it to Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, look, in response to that comment, did the government have a broad view prior to the 2008 financial crisis? Did the government have a broad view prior to the disaster in Iraq and Afghanistan? I simply don't trust in the government that much. I don't trust in fellow people that much to orchestrate our way through a climate change or whatever. I think farmers actually, you call that view narrow. I think they have an essential view, which is the lowest and primary level of the supply chain. They're the ones who are the primary producers. they're dealing with the specific economic strains like the high prices of commodities. So I think that farmers understand better than the government the state of the economy, because for bureaucrats it's simply numbers, but for farmers it's losing the ability to harvest half of their acreage, right? So I think it's a little bit too trusting of the government to say that they have the future scoped out, but not only that, that they have our best intentions in mind, which history shows you is not the case most of the time.
Would that then be a good time to show this article that you wrote recently? This was so Tamara Lich, if I'm saying her name right, she was the Freedom Convoy organizer for the truckers, right? And maybe for people who aren't familiar with her case, you could update us just on quick background. But what's going on here with the Crown prosecutor and the donations, and what was your concern? So yeah, give us a little background on Tamara in case people are unsure who she is, and then how this Crown prosecutor's donation to political parties is a concern for you.
Sure. So Tamara was a central organizer to the Freedom Convoy movement, which through January and February landed in Ottawa, driving from all across the country to protest the Trudeau government's extreme COVID-19 restrictions, which included essentially prohibiting unvaccinated people from leaving the country or traveling on a plane domestically. So yeah, Tamara has been heavily prosecuted. She was arrested at the convoy in February. She has been arrested multiple times since then, and this is the latest case. She was arrested before Canada Day, which was on July 1st. She actually has a hearing today, and they're claiming that she broke bail conditions. So during her original arrest, she got out of prison and on bail, but has all sorts of conditions, including you can't use social media, you can't communicate with other convoy organizers, etc. Now, her recent arrest relates to an award show, which happened not too long ago, where she got a Freedom Award from a constitutional group here in Canada. And in a picture she was in, there was another convoy organizer. Now, Crown prosecutors from the federal government are claiming that this was a breach in her bail conditions. And this fellow right here that you see on the screen is one of the Crown prosecutors that has been leading on Tamara's case. Now, I did a little bit of digging on this individual, and I found that he has donated up to over $17,000 to the Liberal Party. Now, I'd like to make it clear that that's not illegal. Lawyers are allowed to participate in political parties. There's no prohibitions in Canada that prevent you from doing that. But it's an interesting trend, because one of the early judges who oversaw Tamara's case was found to be a former Liberal Party candidate for an election. So there's a connection here. We see how far the Liberals have infiltrated the justice system, and one might think they've rigged it in their favor, and this is actually more of a vendetta than a legitimate, objective prosecution, because they've treated Tamara worse than murderers, right? They gave her multiple days in the last hearing for the judge to consider his judgment. So murder, very heavy criminals get out on the same day on bail, but Tamara is still in jail. She's been back in jail for at least 3 times. So it's becoming clear to a lot of people that this is more than just a legal thing. It's actually a vendetta, and our government has a history of taking people to court that who make them look bad.
All right, let's switch from that to this, because I think there's a connection. So this is trending right now that Canadians may be required to get booster shot every 9 months. We will never be fully vaccinated against COVID, is the quote. And this is Fortune magazine, right? So it's not like this this is a very mainstream news outlet, though I will say I haven't seen it covered by many others yet. Canadian Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos, if I'm saying his name right, said Canadians may soon be required to get a booster shot every 9 months for the foreseeable future to protect against new variants of the COVID-19 vaccine. Basically, in this video, which we can play in a second, but I'll give you a second to kind of tee it up. He says that from now on, you're basically going to be considered up to date on your vaccination if you've had a booster within every 9 months. And we know Canada's got one of the most strict travel policies, or at least did have one of the most strict policies for vaccination, like coming in and out of the country, and then where, dining and all that kind of stuff. So you can give us an update on where that stands, but how does this news change things for potential mandates moving forward? And is there any connection with what we just discussed, which is, like we were talking about, the sort of political leanings of, whoever is the prosecutor, like just all the fingers of sort of the political parties in these different institutions, the judicial system, the health department. We're seeing the same thing in the United States, where it's like people have lost a lot of trust in these institutions because they start appearing as if they're more concerned about policy and politics over what they're supposed to be doing. Judicial system, prosecuting based on facts, did you do this, or what's the law, versus your interpretation of it from a political standpoint, or the Department of Health, for instance, or the CDC, or whoever else. What are the different nuances in the scientific research say versus what is the president or the corporations that influence these government agencies that are benefiting financially from these policies? What do they say? That they're losing a lot of trust. And so I'm just curious what you think about this news.
Yeah, I think the statement itself contradicts a lot of the earlier claims that health officials in Canada and beyond made about COVID-19 vaccination. The fact that nobody at the beginning of the pandemic was told that you would need to get a COVID-19 vaccine every 9 months. I think people would have called that, at least the mainstream media, would have called that a conspiracy theory if a conservative outlet said, by the year 2022, you'll be required to get a vaccine every 9 months. And all of this goes back to what agreements our governments made, what contracts did our government sign with these pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer. A lot of those details are not fully disclosed. Much of it was blacked out and was protected even by our government here in Canada. So I think this is an ideological commitment to making some of the aspects of the pandemic more permanent. You mentioned travel. So yes, our government did do away with travel mandates, particularly targeting unvaccinated Canadians. But when they did that, when they announced that they would be gone, they said this is a temporary suspension. They've made it clear that they would be more than willing to reintroduce this. Same thing goes in the travel industry in Canada. If you want to travel here or get out of the country, you need to use what's called an Arrive Can app, which is an application where you state your vaccination status, provide all of this, your quarantine plan, your personal information before you can board a plane. And they just said recently on Twitter that if you don't use the government application, you can face a fine or even disciplinary measures, which is crazy when we're talking about using just a digital application to get somewhere. So I think there's a desire to make this more permanent. It fits in with their long-term ideological and policy goals. And yeah, and we just have to look at the statistics. There is diminishing returns when it comes to subsequent boosters. Obviously, there will be some flat line where only a certain like the flu shot, only a certain percentage of people will go and do that every 9 months. Most people don't do that. Either they forget or it's not on top of their mind. So yeah, I think the government has all these vaccines. They need to get into people's arms. Another thing we just saw, Canada actually threw out half of its AstraZeneca supply uh, into the garbage. We tried to give it away, nobody wanted it. So the government, I think, is trying to figure out ways to to go by the agreement it's made and try to get those vaccines out into people.
All right, Cosmin, bear with me real fast because what we're talking about today, I'm sure, is going to make everybody want to drink, or at least some of you are going to want to get a good drink. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com and get 50% off some amazing Malbecs. There is currently no mandate for you to get AllisonWinePromo.com, but I would appreciate the support. 50% off the wine and 50% off of the shipping. These are high altitude, in some cases, extreme altitude wines that come from very remote regions of Argentina. They have a very unique, robust flavor because of that. Can't get them at the grocery store. Why would you want to? One of them is from almost 9,000 feet. Another one uses natural fermentation. This Rogue Malbec is hand harvested. The grapes are hand harvested. They're all very unique, have great stories, small producers. So go check it out, AllisonWinePromo.com. You can always help out too if you drink coffee or tea. If you go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, you can get a wide variety of high altitude rose from Nicaragua. There is a limited black edition. I'm a big fan of the cigar right here. Number one, it's a dark roast. I'm actually drinking it right now. And if you're a tea drinker, you can get Katura tea, which is tea made from the coffee fruit. It's also very good. So twinenginecoffee.com, AllisonWinePromo.com, and let's get back to it. Okay, so what I wanted to show everybody here was really quickly, just a quick clip. You all at True North posted this clip of this is your health minister, I believe. Just making sure I'm saying it correctly. Is this the Fauci of Canada?
He would not be the Fauci of Canada. That's the head of our public health agency is Dr. Theresa Tam. She hasn't been too public lately, but he oversees the Public Health Agency of Canada. He oversees the response, but he is a elected government official, not an appointee. Yeah,
he's elected. Okay, you know, can you explain to us then? Because those of us who are in the world of just questioning what's going on, wonder. Even in the United States, we're like, how do all these people keep getting elected? And the Canadians I've had on in a lot of cases are like, no, a lot of Canadians like this. Like they might think we're just lunatic extremists or something for questioning it. So, you know, even before I play this, could you explain, okay, if this guy's elected, did he recently get elected? Did he get reelected? Is he popular? Because we look at it and we're scratching our heads, but maybe lots of Canadians like this. Like they think he's doing a great job and we're just the naysayers.
So I don't think most Canadians like this. We have to look at how many people actually vote in this country. It's not a large number. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, his government got elected to a minority government, which in a parliamentary system means that they need to acquire assistance from another party to basically govern. Otherwise, they face the constant threat of a non-confidence motion, as you saw in the UK recently. So I do think, and during the last election performance, Trudeau didn't get that many votes. I think it was like 36% or something like that. But the Conservatives actually got the lion's share of the popular vote. But because of our electoral system, it's based on capturing ridings, and the Liberals were able to get more seats in the House of Commons. So I don't think they're popular. I think Canadians are getting tired of this government. How do they keep getting elected? Well, you have to really go back into Canadian history, and I've said this before on Twitter and elsewhere. Canada has never had a revolution, right? We didn't rebel or overthrow the British Empire here. We had a very friendly agreement to gain confederation, as it's called here, to be our own country. So that Canadians at large do not have that historical birth myth, right? That foundational myth of throwing the yoke of authority, of external power that is keeping ordinary folks down. No, we have a very supplicant relationship with government, and I think a lot of Canadians to this day believe that the government has their best interests in mind.
Right. I think that's the big split, I think, in the United States, is people who believe that, and people who don't. I mean, honestly, and so then everything kind of, I feel like maybe not everything, but a lot of the way people look at different things like health or the environment or, whatever it may be, come from your perspective on whether you feel like the government mostly has your best interest at heart and is not influenced by nefarious special interests, or the opposite, if you're skeptical of that. And then, from that, you'll think, well, yes, I would like the government to regulate speech, which we'll talk about in a second. Or yes, I would like the government to tell me what I need to do for my health in order to be a participant in society. Or yes, I would like the government to socially engineer my food, or I would like to, I like the government. So so many things come out of that. And as a former TV reporter, I've said this so many times, but it wasn't something that I think our managers were hardly ever. I mean, really, I don't even remember one time where we had a serious talk from a manager who was like, hey, this is where the government screwed up. Okay. So they send us press releases all the time, and they want us to come to their events and their press conferences and all these things, but they're constantly using the media as a mouthpiece for their particular policy. And this is in the past where that has been co-opted by special interests. So let's just beware. Instead, we would often just speak out their press releases as if they were just fact. They were just gospel. We didn't research. We didn't investigate. And if somebody brought us something that criticized the government or said otherwise, well, then we would have to do a whole investigation. We'd have to do months of research into that person and their claims and everything. But the government, we just looked at in the TV news like, oh, the health department is saying this, so we'll just say it. I even think during COVID there were companies who were partnering with local health organizations, agencies, for like they would like partner for vaccine campaigns and public health laws. It was like they were one and the same. They just became an arm of the government, and it was just accepted that way. And it wasn't because reporters were like, oh, we're like aware of the opposite. We know how nefarious they can be and everything, but we just want to be in the big kids club. They were like totally, for the most part, unaware. They just thought that this was the right thing to do. You're a public servant as a journalist, and the government's just trying to help us. And if you think it's fake news, then that's your problem. And there was just so much acceptance of it. And in my opinion, if the last couple years didn't start at least pushing you in the direction of kind of waking up to that, I really don't know what will. But let's just watch this real fast. If it'll start with my internet. You guys are having internet issues in Canada right now too.
Yeah, there's a countrywide outage because of like our internet is controlled by a few companies, and one of the major ones is Rogers, and basically their service went down, and a lot of thousands of people are having trouble connecting to the internet, although I'm not sure if this is related to that.
It's not. It's definitely my internet. Well, we can go back to that. For some reason, it's not wanting to play. What if we talk about, since we're talking about speech stuff, let's go to this, what is it, C11? Is that the bill? Yes. Okay, let's talk about this, because you wrote this article, YouTubers pledge to leave Canada if Bill C11 passes. And somebody who a lot of folks who watch my channel know is Viva Frey, David Frey, who has been, he's a huge YouTuber, and he has recently announced he moved to Florida. He's coming on next week, so everybody should make sure you're subscribed, because YouTube loves to unsubscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're somewhere else, you're fine, but he'll be on next week to talk about that. So he's like one of that crowd, people who decide they're out of here. Tell us about Bill C11 and what it is.
So Bill C-11 is essentially a piece of legislation that will update Canada's Broadcasting Act. Now, the Broadcasting Act, what it does is it puts television, radio, other broadcasting services under government regulation, under a body called the Canadian Radio Television Commission. And so the CRTC, under this bill, would expand its powers into the digital world. So they would be able to regulate online content. Now, the Canadian Liberal government is claiming that this is a bill to force social media companies to pay for Canadian content to protect Canadian creators. But what it really does, it allows this regulator to meddle with algorithms of social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and basically tell them, hey, you need to promote this certified Canadian content over the rest, which we deem not Canadian enough. So you clearly see the trouble of the government mandating what content Canadians are able to see online, or at least see promoted. Now, the bill itself also extends this regulatory power not only to traditional broadcasters, you know, your big CNN or like CBC here in Canada. It actually extends to user-generated content, and CRTC, the head of the CRTC, has admitted it plainly so that they would have the power to control what user content people see online. So I'm talking about, you know, your channel, your just an independent media creator, home videos, etc. The government would have the scope to promote or demote that. And critics of this legislation say it infringes on freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of the media. And I sincerely believe that this is one of several attempts going on in Canada for the government to monopolize control over the media. Only a handful of countries in Canada's media landscape, a handful of companies in Canada's media landscape control about 80% of our media, even local outlets. They've spent the last several decades, these media behemoths, buying local news outlets. And that skews coverage. And the government has also provided a almost a $600 million bailout to media companies. So it's all these different approaches to control what media gets out there, what media blows up online, and to suppress independent content creators like us.
What long term, I guess, or maybe even short term, what would be the actual, like, what kind of power would they throw you in jail? I mean, what are the real threats if you stayed?
So with Bill C-11 particularly, their social media companies, I'm pretty sure, can get fined if they don't obey with regulatory orders. They're basically forcing YouTube, Facebook to sit down with media companies in Canada and reach a negotiated deal where the social media platform will provide some sort of monetary compensation in exchange for having that Canadian content on their platform. It's based on similar legislation which was introduced in Australia. And I don't know if you recall, but back then, Facebook cut off all news content in Australia because in protest to that legislation. So it's very similar. Whether they can put you in jail, there's other legislation that the government wants to introduce. And that's legislation that surrounds online hate. So they want to create a hate speech regime that could lead to hefty fines, house arrest. So if you're found spreading hate, so to speak, the government have yet to define what hate means. The definitions that they're provided are very subjective, and it even leaves room open to being suspected that you're going to be hateful, and the government could move in. So there's multiple pieces of legislation, not just Bill C-11. The government is consulting to expand its overreach into the internet realm. And it's very concerning because down the line, we could see a very similar situation to the China Great Firewall of China, right? Which prohibits Chinese citizens from accessing the rest of the internet, or at least presents them with a very, very insular view of what their government does. So I think it is coming in some form to Canada.
All right. So if you're watching this somewhere else, go to alisonmorrow.locals.com, sign up and be part of my editorial board so you can put in questions ahead of time. I always post who I'm talking to, and then you can go direct with them. One of the benefits of being part of my community there, and benefits of supporting independent work, so that you can go direct with some of the most censored people. So go over there, sign up. Here are some questions for you. If Bill C-11 passes, how do you see Canadians accessing independent news sources for those who are seeking alternative views and are unable to leave the country? Do you think an underground news system will start, or will people even attempt to fight the system?
Yeah, sure. With Bill C-11, I don't think it will be impossible to access independent or alternative news sources. What I do think will happen, it will make it much more difficult for these businesses to be viable, to get people's eyes on their content. So that in turn threatens the diversity of the landscape, which means we'll see fewer independent news sources being able to keep their heads above water. How could Canadians get over Bill C-11 if it passes? I would recommend the easiest thing is you use proxies, VPNs. They do it in China. If people in China can get around their firewall, I don't see it as being a huge problem for an individual to employ this technology to get around some of the censorship. But not everybody has the know-how or capability to do that. Using a VPN is not illegal by any means. It's totally free to do. But the problem is it is a monopolizing thing. They're trying to corner the industry. They're trying to make it their own, and they're trying to prevent this information that makes them look bad from getting to you.
As you're talking about that, it reminds me of my friend who lives in Shanghai and what she has to do to access stuff, in China. And actually, somebody commented, Trudeau said he admired China. Now, do you believe him? Here's another one. It's an existential issue for the Canadian population, not just YouTubers. Is Canadian freedom of speech now at the mercy of their Senate? If the law is passed, can there ever be outright dissent against Canadian government again?
Well, theoretically, we have the ability to dissent against the government in this country, but it's very concerning when the government is starting to legislate speech, to legislate online content. Once you put these things in place, they're very hard to get rid of. And they repeatedly try to expand this control. I think in terms of freedoms, it is a huge threat. And Canada, freedoms in this country are going down the river. I see them departing, and I see the government taking these steps to expand its reach into our lives. Yeah.
Okay. There was another comment about Trudeau's authoritarian bent has been on display for a long time. Why have Canadians allowed the censorship of speech with pronouns? And then they reelected him. Why? Will this be the final blow that pushes Canadians to get rid of Trudeau and all of his WF cabinet? And I hope the same American liberals see Canada and Trudeau as a wake-up call. But I think we kind of already talked about this. You seem to think no, that's not necessarily the case.
So I don't necessarily. So I think Trudeau is in some rough waters right now. I think his traditional veneer of being this respectable, kind of likable guy back in 2015 to a lot of Canadians has totally dissipated. We see him for what he is, which is a narcissist, somebody who is a control freak, somebody who does not allow any sort of dissent within his own cabinet. We've seen him kick out some very high-profile people because they refuse to go along with his plans. This is a prime minister who has had not one but two ethical scandals. first time that's ever happened. You know, he's broken the law twice, found guilty of that. He's facing another ethical scandal for trying to interfere with the police. His office is trying to interfere with a major mass shooting police investigation in Nova Scotia. So I think his clock is running out. But if Trudeau is gone, do I think that the Liberal Party is not going to pursue similar actions? I doubt that highly. I think for Canada to have any sort of chance to undo this damage, we would need to essentially destroy the Liberal Party in an election, keep them from power for at least like a decade. But as we know, based on Canadian electoral history, the Liberals are basically the neutral position for our government. So the Conservatives have a big hill to climb to really prove themselves as willing to undo this. But you know, will Trudeau last until 2025 when the next election is due? I don't think that's a certain answer I could give. It could go either way. He could be replaced. He could resign. You know, we saw Boris Johnson. This is a guy who faced fewer scandals. His scandals compared to blackface Trudeau, you know, kicking Indigenous women out of the Justice Ministry, are totally minor when you compare to our Prime Minister. But somehow Trudeau has this resilience to maintain power, which is very concerning. Yeah.
All right. So asking about Viva leaving Canada, many reasons, but the pending censorship legislation was on the list. I believe he worked with an immigration lawyer and the entire process took about a year. Does Cosmin happen to know, is that typical for a Canadian immigrant?
Well, you know, I don't know. I do know that immigration in Canada, we have a huge backlog in our immigration system. It's totally disaster right now. They didn't fix it during the pandemic. And I wouldn't be surprised if it takes a year just to emigrate out of here. But when you're leaving Canada to the United States, I would suspect that part of that process is actually on the U.S. government itself. The responses and all the things you have to file. So I'm not sure how much the Canadian government has control over emigration as opposed to people coming in this country. But you do have to go through all, you know, the tax stuff, getting rid of properties, etc. So a year seems pretty reasonable. Well, not reasonable, but it seems to be like a norm here.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Cosmin, is there anything else that you're working on or any final closing thoughts before we go that you think people should be paying attention to?
Oh, well, I think, well, in Canada right now we have our parliament is going on a summer recess. So politically, there isn't much going on. But the major thing I did mention, so our prime minister is alleged to have interfered in a mass shooting investigation to support his gun control legislation. Handguns are banned in Canada as of last month. The Trudeau government has banned thousands of different rifles from being owned by law-abiding citizens. At every turn of the way, they're targeting gun owners in this country. Unlike the U.S., we don't have a constitutional protection to own firearms. So it's kind of disgusting to hear that the government pressured the commissioner of our federal police force, the RCMP, to reveal details of an ongoing investigation so it could support a liberal policy objective. Because after this mass shooting, which I think happened in 2020, if I recall correctly, the Trudeau Liberals immediately jumped on it and said, we're going to crack down on guns in this country. And it's sickening to see them use these tragedies for political purposes. So I think that's going to be investigated this summer. We're going to see more stuff coming out about Freedom Convoy organizers being targeted. You know, we're going to find out today if Tamara is going to get out of jail and she'll be back on her bail. And we'll see this continuing international parallel movement to the Freedom Convoy as it's happening in the Netherlands and beyond, because we've seen some rumblings of that in Poland as well, with Germans also participating in the Netherlands one. So I think the elites and our liberal managerial class are feeling pressure because of the things that they've put us through over the last couple of years, and they're not really providing any viable solutions. They're just hammering hard on what they've always known, and reality is catching up to them.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar either. Somebody was bringing up on ROKFIN the UK's online safety bill and its connections and where that could lead to. So it's definitely, whether it all comes from, like we started talking about Trudeau and it was the Dutch prime minister, right? Who have the World Economic Forum connection. That's what we were starting with. Yeah. And, whether it comes from the World Economic Forum or somewhere else, it does seem like you can find similarities depending on the country. Do people in Canada who are leaving think the United States is a lot better? Because we have a lot of our own issues here. Somebody asked if there's buyer's remorse when people get here.
I think it's hard to speak for individual people. I think definitely during the restrictions, people wanted to get the hell out. I know people who moved to Florida. I know people who moved to Texas. I actually know people who moved to Romania. Close friends of mine left Canada before they instituted travel mandates because they just wanted to get out of here. They didn't want anything to do with this government and their overreaching policies, which is just astounding because, back in the 1980s, people were freeing Romania to get to Canada and the United States, but now it's going the other direction because somehow these Eastern European countries have managed to be freer in many respects than countries like Canada. And I think part of that is that collective conscious memory of what communism is and how it unfolds and how slowly it creeps into people's lives until before you know it, you are subject to authoritarian powers out of your control.
All right, Cosmin Dzsurdzsa, this is where you are on Twitter. Everybody go follow him, True North Center. You're a senior researcher and investigative journalist, and I really appreciate your taking the time today. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I'd be happy to be back anytime.
And thank you, everybody who's watching, especially those who are watching somewhere besides YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, just a heads up to everybody, I'm getting messages all the time that people are getting unsubscribed. So let me know if you were unsubscribed. Make sure you're subscribed. I put the chat on subscriber only mode just to make sure that people would see that. But it just helps if you like, share, all that good stuff, and just keep looking for my content because I think I'm down on the list as a troublemaker for whatever reason at this. I know what the reasons are. When they suspended me, they're sort of clear, but not entirely. I feel like they are arbitrarily enforce the rules, as you know, Cosmin. So anyway, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.